Hi. I'd like to welcome everybody to the Midwifery Advisory Council meeting. I'm Carrie Sparavon, and I chair this committee. I'd like to remind everybody to either turn your cell phones off or set them to vibrate so that they don't disrupt the meeting. If you'd like to provide public comment, please fill out a speaker slip in the back and give it to Ms. Sewell, who's here. I'd like to remind the MAC members that today's meeting and all MAC meetings and meetings of the board, any items requiring a vote are done by roll call vote. That means that once a motion is made and seconded, Ms. Lowe will call each of our names individually to request our vote. Any questions about that? I think we're all pretty familiar with it so far. Ms. Lowe, would you please call the roll?
Dr. Adams, Ms. Dugan, Ms. Marcelin, Ms. Yaroslavsky, Ms. Sparavon.
Present.
We have a quorum.
Great. So agenda item 2 is public comment on items not on the agenda. Is there any public comment on things that were not on the agenda? And I'd like to remind everybody that we can take comment, but we can't take any action on anything presented now. Seeing none, I'm going to move forward. Agenda item 3 is approval of the minutes from December 3rd, 2015 and March 10th, 2016. Okay, we'll go back to item 2 then. Did you fill out a speaker slip? Great.
And
just
that is voluntary.
Yeah. Okay. Well, just but identify yourself for us, please.
Okay. Hi, I'm Julia Golden Blackburn, and I'm representing California Families for Access to Midwives. Okay. Hi, I'm Julia Golden Blackburn, and I'm representing California Families for Access to Midwives. And I'd like to comment that our position on VBAC consults, physician consult, is consistent with California Association of Midwives in that we feel that there is no evidence supporting a physician consult and it would decrease access to midwifery care and VBAC. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, now we're going to move on to minute approval. So the 2 meetings that we still need approval of the minutes for December 3rd, 2015 and March 10th, 2016. I understand that Ms. Lowe has received no edits prior to today's meeting. Is that still correct? Is there any public comment on this agenda item? Seeing none. Is there any comment on either the December minutes or the March minutes from members of the MAC?
No.
Okay.
So I would move to approve the minutes for both meetings.
Thank you. I'll second it. Okay. Ms. Lowe's going to call the vote.
Dr. Adams, Ms. Dugan,
Yes.
Ms. Marcelin,
Yes.
Ms. Yaroslavsky,
Yes.
Ms. Sparavon.
Yes.
Thank you.
So item number 4 is my report from the chairperson. And I don't have a whole lot today. We have a lot on our agenda. But I would like to say that I am inspired by the direction that midwifery is taking in this state, by the number of women and family members and others that are involved in helping move this profession forward so that all women in California can have access to midwifery care if that's what they choose to have. I really appreciate and respect the determination and the fortitude that many have shown as we craft regulations, as we discuss all kinds of things from hospital transfer forms to regulations to midwife assistance to all of that that's gone on in the last few years. And anyway, I just wanted to say thank you to everybody. Are there any questions or public comments on that agenda item? Okay, great. We're going to move forward then. So item 5 on the agenda is the Midwifery Advisory Council membership. So I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Lowe so she can explain the process that was used.
Thank you. All right. So at the beginning of May, board staff sent notice to all licensed midwives, subscribers on the board's subscriber alert list, and posted information on the board's website indicating that the board was seeking applications from licensees to fill one position on the MAC. The vacancy advertised was for one licensed midwife with a term to expire June 30th, 2019. Staff received 9 applications for the vacancy. Following today's meeting, the nominee will be presented to the board at the October 27th and 28th quarterly board meeting for final approval. If there's no questions, we'll go ahead and get started.
That'd be great.
As
I
mentioned,
don't see any.
9 applications were received. Those were from Tanya Brooks, Angela Chang, Margaret D. Felice, Karen Ehrlich, Diane Holzer, Farron Jones, Rebecca Lake, Celesta Ranisi, and Renee Signano, excuse my pronunciation. Prior to requesting nominations from the MAC, if any of the applicants are here in attendance and would like to introduce yourself and make a statement to the MAC, you are welcome to come forward.
Tanya, you want to come first?
Well, thank you for hearing me, and I made a list of about 99 reasons why I should do it, but in interest of time, I'd like to use my clinical experience as a midwife who had a birth center for 38 years. I just retired as the senior midwife and director of the Natural Birth and Women's Center and one of the longest-running birth centers in the United States. I'd like to use my experience in training midwives, childbirth educators, parents, doulas, and my experience as a midwife doing a tri-level practice, which means very low risk, which are qualified for home births and out-of-the-hospital births, intermediate risk, who are co-managed with physicians, and consults and hand-holding in the hospital for high-risk patients. And so we have always done that. And in doing that, I also developed a form many, many years ago, which I just gave to Carrie, on transfers, from interpartum transfers from out of the hospital birth into hospital, so that midwives could document what actually occurred when they transferred. Now, the interest of this was to originally figure out where the problems were, and there were many. There were many, many. I have 25 years of these forms now. However, so I believe that both my academic and my clinical experience would be helpful to the MAC committee. I was around many years ago when we established the midwifery license, and I came, on my own dime. It'd be nice to have some of that reimbursed. And lastly, I'd like to mention that there never has been a representative from Southern California. And Southern California has a very active midwifery scene, and I would like to hopefully fulfill that. I'd like to see that midwives from big urban areas with slightly different problems are also addressed, and I know that there are several midwives that have been in and around San Francisco, which is similar but not exactly the same. And so I'd like to just offer my services if you think I could be of help. That's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Was there another applicant that would like to step forward? Rebecca?
Hello, my name is Rebecca Lake, and my interest in serving on the MAC lies in attending these meetings. I'm sitting out there in the audience since 2012. I've attended nearly every MAC meeting and interested parties meeting, babies permitting. I was on the board of CAM during the legislative process in the passing of AB 1308, and I'm intimately aware of all of the nuances in this regulatory process. On a personal level, I was taken care of by licensed midwives who existed before licensure. I attended a didactic program, and now that the law requires that midwives attend a board-approved program, I think it's time that the MAC has a member who has attended a board-approved school. My father's a physician, and he's been sued 3 times for frivolous reasons. So I also understand a lot of where ACOG has come from and the debates that have been in this room, and the pressure that is inherent in being a physician and the liability there. And I feel like I have a very unique perspective and can help in finding solutions as we move forward, not only through the hospital transport form and VBAC, but in the 3 years that the seat asks for. Thank you.
Thank you. Karen?
Hi, Karen Ehrlich. I think you all know me. Having been on this council since its inception in 2007, I have been deeply involved, clearly, with everything that has gone on. I would just like to state that the only reason I did not apply in the spring had nothing to do with me not wanting to be on the council anymore or not being interested in the activities that the council was undertaking. It had to do with thinking perhaps that it would be a good idea to get some new energy on the council. The fact that there were no applications in the spring re-energized me, and I have found myself more than eager to participate if that is the will of the council. You know me, I don't need to tell you what my interests are or my thoughts on all of these processes. I also understand completely if indeed there is somebody else who is appointed. I don't know what else to say. I think that should do. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Diane?
Diane Holzer, Fairfax, California. Have to say, in all honesty, I'm not really attached to me being the person who comes on to the MAC council, but I am attached to having that person have a few qualifications, of which I feel like I do fit those qualifications. But the first qualification I would urge the MAC to consider would be somebody who has some history with California, history and experience with California midwifery politics. I do have that. I've been in and out of the politics. I mean, Janice Coleman, myself, and Susie Myers wrote our challenge exam for the state. So I've been in and out of the politic situation since then, which was, I don't know when that was, early 90s that we did that. The second thing I would hope that the person would have would be experience in writing regulations, because I feel like the next steps that the MAC has to make are going to be pretty tricky. And writing regulations is not an easy task, and getting involved in changing them and having to, whatever we have to do, if we have to go to the legislature or no, it's something that's not an easy thing to do, and I definitely have experience doing that. I was on the commission in El Paso, and we wrote our city's regulations for that. I helped with the state of New Mexico in writing their regulations, and sat on the steering committee for the National Certification Task Force, which basically implemented the credential of the CPM, the Certified Professional Midwife. So I have experience with national regulations as well. The third thing that I would really hope that our person who gets picked would be the ability to understand compromise, but yet be able to hold a strong bottom line if there's a strong bottom line, and also be committed to transparency in the process. I think that's a really important quality that someone needs to have in the next steps of what we have to do as the MAC. And I believe I've probably demonstrated that over the years of my involvement in the midwifery political scene. So really those are the things I want the MAC to consider, is those things. Now that I see there's a long list of applicants, many of them probably fit that bill, but I would hope that would be the things that you would think about when you think about who you want to choose. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't recognize any of the other applicants. Is there another applicant that we haven't heard from sitting in the audience? Okay. So I would just like to say something, because when I got the packet and I saw that there were so many really qualified women who wanted to do this job, because it is a job. The wages are sort of low monetarily, but it is a job. And so then, and then I realized, oh my gosh, I know a whole bunch of these people. So then I had to go, okay, so how am I going to pick? Like, what do I want to see on the MAC as we move forward? And one of the criteria that I came to was that I think it's important for those of us helping to create policy for licensed midwives to be actively practicing, to I'm not creating. These are my own. This was my own thought process. What I went through in terms of what was important to me in criteria, and that was one of the things that I thought was important. And another thing was history, and where were we going with that ultimately? How was the future of this committee going to be shaped? So I'm wondering if anybody on the council would like to create a nomination at this point.
Well, I'd like to nominate Diane Holzer.
I'd like to nominate Rebecca Lake.
Okay.
Is this the way we do it?
I would second the nomination for Diane Holzer.
I would second the nomination for Rebecca Lake.
I think if we've got more than one nomination, then you vote by voting your support for the person that you want to have the position.
Can we discuss?
Yeah, you can
discuss the applicants
yes.
more? Okay. So I would actually be happy with either of these nominees. But one of the things that occurred to me was that in choosing another midwife from the Sacramento area, it means that the doctor and all three midwives practice in this area. Mm-hmm. And we could choose to do that, but I'm wondering whether that's what is the most beneficial thing at this point.
So of the two candidates whose names have been mentioned, where do they practice?
Diane Holzer is in Marin, aren't you? Yeah, and Rebecca Lake is in Sacramento, as is Tosi and as is Dr. Adams, and I practice just over the river in Yolo counties, as well as Lake County. But my main practice is in this same area. So that's my concern there.
And I, in listening to all three candidates that spoke, I thought it's a tough decision because I think
it's a really tough decision.
Horribly well qualified, and Ms. Holzer brought up some really good points that I think are. I don't know Ms. Brooks. I don't know Ms. Brooks, but but it looks like she has the same qualifications as Rebecca Lake, and as and as Ms. Holzer. But Ms. Holzer's first comment was she's not really personally attached to being on the committee, and I'd love for somebody that's. And I don't mean that to say that you're not passionate, but passionate about being on the committee, I think is important. Pardon?
I think that there's a clarification. I mean, let's be fair. When you sit up here and you tell us why you want to run or you don't want to run to be on this commission, I agree with you, Doctor. You're absolutely right. The issue, though, I think as far as being self-deprecating, or if that's the correct word, is that's in the speaker's vision. I don't think that I
don't feel like she was self-deprecating. I think what I understood was I can do this, and no one else had really stepped up. We need to make sure the person has these qualifications, and if I do it or not, it's okay. That's what I understood. I don't think she was self-deprecating.
I agree.
And I think that the comment of having someone from a board approved school and with passion for this, who also has experience, is important. Although I also think it would be great to have somebody from a different part of the state. I think the schooling is lends more credibility. Fortunately or unfortunately, it just does.
So, some of the things on Ms. Holzer's resume that really struck me, even though I've known her for a very long time, I've never seen her resume before, but she's active not just in California midwifery politics and has been for years, but also national and internationally. So, I mean, when Diane came and presented to us last year on the home birth summit that she is part of, and what their home to hospital best practices, what that looked like, it made me feel like there were resources there that we could really use on this council. Ms. Lake has some really strong points on her CV as well. I don't want to downplay that. It's a hard choice. It's a very hard choice.
Yeah, I've worked with several of the applicants in different capacities, and I would be thrilled with almost anybody who's applied. There are so many good and qualified candidates.
Absolutely.
And I've worked with Rebecca closely on CAM. I've worked with Renee. I know Tanya. I know Diane, and I know everybody here is qualified. I feel like Rebecca's energy is really vibrant, and she does span a wide reach between clients and physicians and licensed midwives, and I feel like that's really important to the younger generation of midwives in the state. And I really would love for someone from a different area to be serving, but I don't want that to be a negative or to her detriment just because she happens to live here. And she does come to all the meetings because she lives here. So in some ways, that's an asset.
Mm-hmm. Right. And I just want to say, for the future, I am not going to be reapplying for my position. I know that there were a lot of applicants when I applied, but I was the only one who showed up, and so I got the job. I also believe that somebody younger than me. I mean, all of us midwives who've been serving are well over 55, and it is time for someone younger. Sorry, Jocelyn, you're the outlier here. I was going to say everybody on the board, but then I looked at you. So, it is time, but I only have one more year to serve, don't I?
I think so.
Yeah. So
I don't know for sure. Though.
There will be no dynasty in my part of trying to stay on here. So there will be opportunities opening up in the near future as well. I just wanted all of you guys to know that has been my decision.
We've never done anything about appointing committees or having people join on committees, and that may be something also that we need to be thinking about, the opportunities for, given regs are going to need to be written, and we have more than a competent staff that does that, but input and engagement from a broader community might be an opportunity also to think about placement of, we have a handful of very, very qualified people that are definitely engaged, so I'm betwixt and between,
You need to come up to the mic, please.
You're not seeing very many people from Southern California because it cost me $500 to come here today, $45 in cab fares, $10 to eat, and many midwives cannot afford that. And I am seriously worried about transports and especially about hospitals reporting midwives for transfers. It's not, and we have to be, and I'm passionate about this because for those of you who don't know me, I've devoted 45 years of my career to preventing brain injury. I'm a research scientist as well as a midwife. The last 16 years I've been studying glycoproteins they're used in preventing obstetric hemorrhage, and I'm hopefully we'll be able to do something at Loma Linda University soon. But it's really important to me that we improve the outcomes of midwives. I'm going to tell you one thing.
I think we're getting beyond.
Yeah, you are going to be on that, but I do want to say that in terms of the MAC committee, it's really important to me that the MAC committee look at the qualities of the schools that are training our new midwives. As a owner of a birth center, I can tell you none of the new graduates were qualified to work there.
Please
zero.
Conclude.
And so it's important to me to make sure that midwives are not afraid to transfer, and so that the transfer regulations are good. And I've had very successful backup my entire career. I work well with doctors, and I'm good at that. I understand their issues. And I'm passionate about midwives in Southern California feeling like they have a voice, because it is really frustrating to come up here when, I haven't been here at every MAC committee the last few years because my husband had stage 4 cancer, and I'm very happy to say after 7 years of a long, hard fight, he's well and pronounced cancer-free the last year. But it's really important to me that all of us feel recognized and all of us feel represented, and I don't feel that way. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, Carrie,
Yeah.
there are 2 nominations that have been made. Should we take a vote at this point?
Unless there are further comments.
Are we ready to do that? Are there more comments? Do we want to? I'd really like to see us have consensus on this, but I'm not seeing that coming together. And so, anybody else on the council have anything more that they would like to say? You're not on.
Can we appoint a successor now to Ms. Marceline?
No. We can only do the task that's before us right now. I would say, though, to that I think it's really important that every time we have to appoint somebody new, we get tested this way. I love seeing how many people took the time to apply and show up. And it's not easy. I understand that. Midwives' practices are busy. And yes, it's a lot easier to show up for a 3-hour meeting if you live locally than it is if you live 400 miles away. And I understand that also. So I would really encourage the applicants who aren't chosen today, because we really can only choose one person, to reapply next time and the time after that and the time after that, and to continue to stay engaged and coming to the meetings and participating. Because even if you're not sitting up here, and maybe even more so if you're sitting out there, you're important and your voice is important. And anyway, I'm really pleased that so many really highly qualified people applied for this position. Any other comments from the audience? Okay, then I'm going to ask Ms. Lowe to call a vote. Oh, sorry.
Okay. So my question to the two people who have been nominated, would you be, either of you or both of you, interested in, if you are not selected today, would you be interested in applying next year? Any of you? Nobody? It's now or never. Yes. Okay.
And there's no comments?
Tell us what you think, Diane.
It's really hard to know what I would do in a year from now, but probably, more than likely, I would do that. But it really would depend. I'm interested now. I'm sorry I gave you the impression that I wasn't really passionate about this. I come to these meetings a lot. I am passionate about the meetings, but I was just, I guess, trying to say there's a lot of qualified people, and I understand the hard task that you all have in front of you. And if I'm from the Midwest, I do that. It is.
You're trying to make us feel better.
It is a self-deprecating thing. I'm sorry, I do that. I would be passionate about it, but as far as whether I would do it next year, I don't know. I couldn't say yes or no. It would depend. If we're still writing regulations, probably.
Thank you, Diane. Did you want to say something, Rebecca?
Likewise, it's hard to say next year what life would look like. Although I must say I'm absolutely blown away that there's any conversation happening between myself and an icon like Diane Holzer. That in and of itself is a compliment.
All right. Anybody else? Anyone else like to say anything? All right, then I'm gonna ask for a vote.
Okay, so there's 2 nominations on the table. The first nomination is for Diane Holzer. Those in favor will say aye or nay. Roll call vote. Dr. Adams?
Nay.
Ms. Marcelin? Yay. Ms. Dugan?
Nay.
Ms. Yaroslavsky? Ms. Sparvan?
Yes.
So then that vote would be in favor for Diane Holzer. And we do not need to take the vote for Rebecca at this time.
Just like to thank everybody once again. And Rebecca, I really do hope you'll apply again next year.
Okay, so at this time, we would need a motion to recommend Diane Holzer for the vacant licensed midwife position on the MAC to the board for approval. Is there a second?
Second.
Did you? Okay. Okay. So as mentioned, we'll now present this at the full board meeting in October for final approval. Yes, I do. Thank you. So a vote for the motion. Dr. Adams?
Yes.
Ms. Dugan?
Yes.
Ms. Marcelin? Yes. Ms. Yaroslavsky? Ms. Sparvon?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I believe that the board authorized the candidate that was accepted for the position could come and join the MAC for the meeting and take part.
All right.
Very good. I'd also like to just take half a second to welcome our other two new members, Jocelyn Dugan and Dr. Anne-Marie Adams, since this is your first MAC meeting as well.
Thank you. I was forgetting I'd met you before. I was really terrible over. Which could happen.
All right. Okay, so we have now finished with agenda item 5, yeah? So agenda item 6 is update on licensed midwifery legislation. Ms. Mose, please.
So the one piece of legislation that's still moving through the legislature is AB 1306, and this is a bill that removes physician supervision for certified nurse midwives. So it was held, it was dead for like a year, and then it came back alive. And so the big issue, there's a copy of the bill in your packets, and there's also the board's position letter back on the back table. But a lot of amendments have been taken, and basically it sets up like they're going to have something similar to the MAC and the BRN and the Board of Registered Nursing. It allows certified nurse midwives to practice in specified settings, and those include like licensed health facilities, medical group practice, and others, but it also allows them to practice in home settings, and it sets forth the criteria. So it is a little similar to the licensed midwife bill that passed, but there is some differences. And so basically there has to be an absence of a pre-existing maternal disease or condition creating risks, a disease arising from or during the pregnancy, or prior cesarean. But what they did in this bill is if a client has a prior cesarean, the CNM has to provide the woman with a referral for an examination by a physician trained in obstetrics and gynecology. And the CNM can only assist the woman if an examination is obtained, and based upon review of the client's medical file, the CNM determines that the risk factors presented by the woman's condition do not increase the woman's risk. So it's a little bit different. They're not doing regulations. There's still a physician involved as far as an examination, but the CNM makes that determination. The other thing that's been a big issue for this is the ban on corporate practice in medicine. So when this bill first started going, it went through the Assembly Business and Professions Committee, and they asked them to include the ban on corporate practice in medicine, which basically means a hospital or a health facility can't directly hire a CNM. And that's that. The ban on corporate practice in medicine is also in place for physicians. And the point of that is the employer, which would be the hospital or the health setting, can't interfere for reasons that may interfere with the physician's medical judgment, basically. And so the ban on corporate practice in medicine has been a huge issue for this bill. So when it went to the Senate side with that ban language included, it couldn't make it. And so the Senate...
So they didn't want the ban there, or they did?
So the Assembly wanted the ban, the Senate didn't want the ban. And so it got caught in this catch-22, so it just kind of sat for a year. So they ended up taking language to remove the ban. It got out of the Senate committee, but now that's the point of contention for, like the medical kind of associations want the ban included. The hospitals don't want the ban included because they want to be able to hire the CNM. So although it's moving through the legislature, that's still a point of contention. We're like in the very end stages of the legislative session. So there's like 2 weeks for all bills to get to the governor. And I've been asking for updates on a pretty regular basis. I'm not sure they know what they're going to do. The deadline for amendments is tomorrow, so we'll find out pretty soon if this bill is going to move to the governor or not. But
can I ask you a question on the bill? On page 4, under number 7, where it talks about family members having financial interests in all that, that's conflict of interest, not corporate practice of medicine, correct?
Yeah, that's the ban, like on the kickbacks and advertising and stuff like that apply to physicians.
That's not what they're talking about taking out, correct?
No,
They're
that's
gonna
not
leave
what they're talking
okay,
about.
good. Okay.
They're talking about taking out has already actually been taken out. This
So
bill,
they didn't
I
find
don't.
it yet.
Yeah. They actually have language that says that that they, they can't, the CNMs can't, their judgment can't be interfered with. It's kind of similar. They're trying to address that issue, but it's not far enough for a lot of those that are now opposed.
So the other question I have also was this expanding the current scope of practice?
It is. So the medical board, at our last meeting, they took an opposed unless amended position, and Carrie, you were there, So the issues they have is the medical board does believe the ban should be included, and then the scope actually includes primary health, and so the board thought that was too broad, and so those are the two issues that.
Do you know what we did on the nursing board? I don't remember. I know we discussed it, but
I don't know.
So
I would think they'd be in support of it.
That's my concern, yeah.
I know nobody asked me, but my biggest concern is the way the language is written around VBAC, because if everybody already knows that a vaginal birth after a prior cesarean slightly increases your risk over never having had a cesarean before. So in my way of thinking, that eliminates VBAC with CNMs right there. I mean, she doesn't even need to go for the consult, because it's going to be up to the CNM to determine that she's at no higher risk than if she'd never had the cesarean. I mean, that's how I read that. And so if it passes the way that it is, it creates issues for us creating our regulations. But I think it also creates this kind of a gray zone for CNMs doing VBACs, and we won't know which side of the divide it's on until there's a sad outcome, So that's my biggest concern with it. I'm wondering if anybody else from the audience has anything they'd like to say, or from the MAC regarding this piece of legislation.
So let me just, before you come up, I just want to make sure that we're not taking position. We're just saying.
No, it's just an update.
Okay, just make sure.
Still alive, and I can update you with what happened to it at the next meeting.
Faith Gibson, California College of Midwives, and I'm not sure that my comment really matters in the sense that you guys are not voting on this piece of legislation, but I was at the meeting, the medical board meeting, where there was a discussion, the decision to take and oppose unless amended, and the issue of having midwives licensed, in this case nurse midwives, identified as providing primary health care was a big, oh my gosh, that means that they're going to be treating, I don't know what, heart disease or whatever. And I have such a different definition of what midwives do in terms of primary health care, which is that we keep people healthy. And that has nothing to do with prescribing allopathic drugs for urinary tract infections or any of those kinds of things. In fact, it's that other end of the spectrum where you're helping people know what would maybe cause a urinary tract infection, or to try things that are non-allopathic in ways of a first line of defense against the problem. And I would hate to see the bill lose based on this concept that what healthcare is actually a proxy word for allopathic medical care. I don't think that's a good idea. I don't think that's even what it means. Thank you.
So wait, before you go,
okay.
Because what you're saying is exactly what I was reading, and I just want to make sure that I'm hearing what you're saying. Because in the bill it says it would delete these provisions and would instead authorize a certified nurse midwife to manage a full range of gynecological and obstetric care for women from adolescence and beyond menopause as provided. And then there becomes a period. So that meant to me, my concern is that now we're going to expect certified nurse midwives to be able to do everything and anything from 12 years old to 95. Mm-hmm. And if the law is going to start to suggest that, the scope of practice for a certified nurse midwife is...
Actually, that is not what I was referring to. I was referring to the sentence that she read a minute ago about doing primary health care, which would
that's what this
which
is
would
too.
not be restricted to obstetrics and gynecology.
Right,
So
that's exactly the way I took this. That was my concern. That
I would just say practice. I've practiced with certified nurse midwives in the same clinic setting for years and years and years, and I will tell you that in practice, this already is the case. It's not an expansion of their scope of practice. They're already providing this kind of care. In the clinic system that I work at, the doctors are scared to death to see a woman who's pregnant with a cold or cough. They want us to do it. And I'm like, no, it's not part of my scope. You guys got to do it. But the CNMs often will see them and, check their ears or check their throat or do a strep test or whatever. And I think the purpose of this language is to make it clear that what they're already doing is legal.
Well, that's the board's position, so I'm just really providing an update.
No, I understand. We have another comment.
Linda Walsh, President of California Nurse Midwives Association. Point of clarification that in other parts of the bill, our scope of practice is consistent with the national standards of care from the American College of Nurse Midwives, which does recognize our ability to provide primary care to women, and it's fairly specific. It also links it to the educational process and educational components of preparing nurse midwives for this role, too. And I would just add that we are still in discussions. I just had several texts come through as a 141 of what we are moving ahead. There will probably be some amendments that we have been assured by the Medical Association that they would be happy with if we do decide to include them. So we're not dead yet.
I'm still worried about that VBAC language and how you guys are actually going to implement it. I think it's just really badly written.
Carrie, can you point to that right in here so that I can read that too?
Oh, maybe. Go ahead, please.
Hi, again, representing California Families for Access to Midwives. We fully support certified nurse midwives removing physician supervision. Again, we are very concerned with the VBAC language and the physician consult and the consequences that will have for licensed midwives, and also the consequences that it will have for women to access VBAC.
Absolutely. Thank you for weighing in on that. Yes, Ms. Camel.
Hi, I'm Jen Camel, founder of VBAC Facts, and I just wanted to also comment on the VBAC language in terms of the nurse midwife who ultimately makes the decision about mode of delivery. And I wonder where the concept of the patient determining her own set of risks and benefits and making this decision for herself comes in, because she is ultimately the one who will bear the risk and bear that either that victorious VBAC or bear a complication. And so she should be the one to be able to make that risk assessment for herself and decide what's the best course of action, especially taking into consideration the increasing risks that come with multiple prior cesareans, the inaccessibility of VBAC in many California hospitals. The most recent statistic was 44% of California hospitals ban VBAC. So for many women, out-of-hospital VBAC is their only option. So I just want to make sure that we are honoring each person's ability to determine their own medical care rather than having it written into regulation, that a provider makes that determination and dictates what options are available.
I agree with that completely.
I totally agree with you.
And that was after reading this, that's why I wanted you to point it out to me. It should be the person who's having the baby who gets to decide who gives the care. And I think that that's a really big concern as a mother, as a public member, that I want to decide who sees me and I want to pick my provider. And I think most people want to do that. And it really does restrict access if you can't let a woman decide who's treating her.
And if I just quickly say one more thing. When we look at ACOG's Guide on Professional Ethics and their most recent committee opinion on informed refusal, they're very clear that the patient is the legal authority when it comes to birth, and that the patient is the one who ultimately legally can make these decisions. And so to have this written in the legislation that the patient is not actually able to make these decisions in terms of midwifery care is not consistent with other care providers and their ethical obligations.
Thank you. So unfortunately, we don't get to really vote on this, but we'll have to see how it shapes up in the next couple of weeks. And I also really support nurse midwives becoming autonomous providers as licensed midwives are. Are there any other comments from the MAC? That's all you've got for us? Nothing else? Thank you. Any other comments from the audience on this agenda item? All right. We're going to move on to agenda item 7, update on the continuing regulatory efforts required by Assembly Bill 1308. Ms. Webb, please.
This is going to be short because there's nothing new. And certainly with the C&M legislation moving forward, the debate about the language for the regulations is still ongoing. So unless anyone has questions about it, we're and waiting to see if there's going to be a legislative change on this or some type of a solution to a compromise for the regulations to be able to move forward.
So I guess the only thing I have to say about that is that I feel like the midwives have moved to compromise, and it's the physicians that are not also moving. And so maybe we could, I don't know how, but maybe we could work on that to get a compromise from both sides to move these regulations forward, because we need to craft them. We need to get them moving. And while we sit and not be able to come to agreement on VBAC, there is no regulation that tells us what we are required to consult for. So once again, please, people, get together and figure out a compromise.
Can I ask?
Just say your name again, please.
Sorry, Julia Golden Blackburn. Can I ask how the midwives have compromised in the negotiations?
From what I understand, the midwives are willing to have no consult for one prior cesarean and consult for 2 or more prior cesareans. And revisit the language from the regulation that was adopted in 2005 to just tweak it a little bit to work with existing law. So that's, correct me if I'm wrong. No, I looks like I've got that right. That the midwives are willing to have no consultation for one prior cesarean, low transverse, and more than that to consult.
So is a way to move the ball forward is to start with regulations and get to what we can agreed on, and then what we can't agree on, take it off the plate. And is that one way to?
Well, we did that. We have a whole list. Am I right, Ms. Webb, of things that both sides totally agree on. The only thing that is not agreed on is the issue of VBAC. And once again, I will remind people that we crafted a regulation in 2005 that delineated how a woman was to be consented for a VBAC, and that included any prior VBAC. We were not prior cesarean. We were not restricted in the number of prior cesareans that we could care for. So for the midwives and women to now come and say, okay, well, if it was only one prior cesarean, then there doesn't need to be a consult. But more than that, we will consult. So there has been some movement there and some compromise. And I haven't seen anything from the medical side, the physician side, that says why that prior regulation would no longer work. What's the new data that there is that would inform us that now all of a sudden vaginal birth after a prior cesarean at home is more risky than it was 11 years ago when we wrote that regulation. So that's the only sticking point now for doing that regulation. And there isn't any way to bifurcate it and accept the regulation of what we've agreed on and say that this VBAC issue is still hanging out. Am I correct? Like move a regulation forward with the part we've agreed on?
That's basically what I was asking.
We've talked about that, but it would get very strenuous objection and would make it challenging to get through the board for approval to notice the language. And so really a strong compromise is the ideal. So we're working towards that.
Any other comment from the council?
I'm super new here. I know that. Is there something that we can do to help facilitate this? Because everybody agrees, physicians and midwives, that an unassisted home birth after cesarean is super dangerous. And people will keep doing that if you remove the choice for them to pick who their provider is. Is there something that I can do to help engage the public to work on this in a way that gets their voice heard?
I'm wondering what CFAM is doing with the public on this. Could you speak to that? Thank you. Just tell us your name again for the camera.
Hi, I'm Julia Golden Blackburn again, and right now we're keeping the public educated about it. In June, we basically brought them all up to date on this, the fact that being able to bill Medi-Cal isn't going to go forward until it's resolved, and it's not being resolved. Right now, we're waiting to figure out the right steps to engage the public. I know many of you know we have a strong member base that wants to engage. We get messages almost every day asking, what can we do? And we would like to know, too, what can we do in the most effective way to help this move forward.
Did you have something you wanted to say?
Well, I was just looking at the outcomes of out-of-hospital births from our LMAR for the last year, and there were 172 successful VBACs. We're already doing this work on that level, and I was wondering if there's any further information that we could share with the medical people who are opposing this. And I also want to I also want to recraft a question I've asked several times at these meetings, which is, can we write regulations that can go to the Office of Administrative Law saying what we want them to say without ACOG and doctor input, and see what happens? Do we have to have them sign off on them in order to have them go?
It's the full medical board that votes on the language that is going to be noticed through the Office of Administrative Law.
Right. We have to get through the full board first. We have to present something to them that they're willing to move forward.
Well, can we present something that is, as compromising as we can be and see what happens? Because sitting around waiting for the next interested parties meeting has not been, which you said there isn't any reason to do since nobody's moving forward. I have a little joke, an internal joke. It took us 20 years to get rid of supervision, and when I mentioned that, when this issue came up, everybody assured me it wouldn't take 20 years. Well, 2 years down, 18 to go is how I'm seeing it. Somebody has to do something, or we'll raise these questions 4 times a year until 20 years, and everybody gives up.
Yeah. Ms. Camel?
Jen Camel, I just thought of something sitting in the audience. What if we were able to come up with an informed consent document that out-of-hospital midwives would use and that the board would approve, that would go over the risks and benefits of having a VBAC at home, acknowledging the risk of uterine rupture, the fact that we cannot predict who will have a uterine rupture and who won't, the risk factors that we are aware of, what increases or decreases risks, the element of luck, the impact of transfer time, and maybe that's something that with the medical board having their input on it and recognizing that every woman would be consented in this fashion, maybe that would be a way to circumvent a physician approval / consult and yet be able to get to the women the information that the medical board is concerned about relative to out-of-hospital VBAC. And that would be a way to uniform the informed consent process and, again, leave the woman as the one who ultimately makes the decision as opposed to regulations.
So are you thinking of putting the consent into the regulatory document?
Yes. Yeah. And having a document that the board approves, maybe MAC writes, the board approves, and then that is a way that we're able to make sure that every woman planning an out-of-hospital VBAC is getting uniform information about the risks that she's undertaking, so they're not minimized, they're not exaggerated, and also taking into account those risks for subsequent children depending on her current mode of delivery.
I would certainly be in support of that, but what I would say would have to happen is that the players, all of them, need to get together and see whether that is something that everybody could agree to and what the points of that informed consent would be. One of the big pluses for it, I think, is that it's uniform. It's not dependent on what the doctor in Reading says that's different from the doctor in Santa Cruz County. So I see some real pluses there for that, and maybe that is a way to move it forward.
And that would also circumvent the issues that we have when we're asking obstetricians to look into the future and predict how an individual woman is going to play out, which is essentially how that will be interpreted when women go in for a consult, is how can I possibly approve this as something that's legitimate for you to do when no one has a crystal ball and no one wants to subject themselves to that potential liability by approving something that they can't really predict.
Well, there's two other problems with the physician approval process, which is, one, they aren't being asked in our current legislation to approve or disapprove. They're just of home birth or anything like that. They're just supposed to give odds that that a vaginal birth would be probable. The other problem is there's nothing in there that requires the physician to give any report back to the midwife. And there's no way we're going to increase their burden of paperwork without their consent. So it kind of snags right there in the middle anyway. You know, the process of physician approval also means the woman herself is left in the middle saying, oh, well, this is what my doctor said, without any written confirmation for the midwife. It could, if it turns out not as well as people think it will, then the doctor will always say, well, I said, and it could be exactly the opposite. So it's a area that's fraught with problems.
I need to just refocus quickly on the law, because if it was just a matter of informed consent, I think we could have already had this done. But under 2507, it's the physician really does have to sign off that he or she determines that the risk factors presented by her disease or condition are not likely to significantly affect the course of pregnancy and childbirth. So
but that's only if we send her for a consult, right?
Right. But this is the holdup for those regulations. So
are you saying then that we couldn't put in regulation, instead of if she's had a prior cesarean, she needs a consult, that we can't say if she's had a prior cesarean, she has to sign this prescriptive informed consent?
We could do that. I imagine there would be something to that effect, but I'm not convinced that it would overcome ACOG's objections.
Even though the patient is legally the decision maker? I mean, so if the physician says no, the patient does what?
That's the challenge of the statute.
Well, if I'm not mistaken, we determined what those conditions are that require consultation. So if VBAC is if we present that in the regulation that this informed consent is used for VBACs, then it doesn't need to be one of those conditions that requires consultation. But I would add that to the consent form, there be fairly strong language encouraging a woman to seek physician consultation. But it gives her the option. It makes her the one that decides whether she does it. But that we strongly encourage you to seek the advice of a physician on this matter.
And maybe provide the woman with the specific language from the regulation in terms of what that physician is being requested to do, because I completely agree with you about what the legislation says and what the regulations say, but I also see from the OBs, VBAC supportive OBs that I know, how they have interpreted that regulation, and they see it as I'm signing off on a home VBAC. And I've had an OB from San Diego who is extremely supportive of VBAC say, there is no way I would do that. I would not write it in the medical chart that I had a VBAC, out-of-hospital VBAC consult with her. I would never sign off or approve in any way. So I think maybe that would be another way to mitigate OB concern, is by giving that woman basically a letter to the OB saying, this is exactly what I'm looking for. Rather than, so that might clarify any of the concerns that even VBAC supportive OBs have, because I see a lot of OBs who would say, there is no way I would ever associate my name with an out-of-hospital VBAC, because of that idea that somehow that appointment or that consultation really means that they are saying, you're good to go.
Yeah.
And OBs, they just would, it would be a very unusual OB who'd be willing to do that.
I disagree. Yeah. And the other part of that is if we get that from supportive OBs, how are we going to deal with the unsupportive OBs, which are probably in the majority? If we had a form that they signed, that might be partly helpful, but what I see it leading to is lying. I mean, a woman going into a doctor and saying, hi, I had a cesarean section last time or 10 times ago. I mean, I've done VBACs for people who have had 1 cesarean section and 7 VBACs. Is she the same kind of person we're talking about? I mean, it's just ridiculous. And so we're just coming to a point where doctors would have to be lied to by the person who's coming. I'm interviewing doctors to see if you do VBACs, No,
I disagree with what we're talking.
I don't like that.
I disagree with that in relationship to what we're talking about. We're talking about a consent form to a woman saying that she has the right and that she's encouraged to do that. If she goes to that physician and then decides to have a cesarean, that's her decision. So we don't need to ask the physician anything. She needs to consult with the physician, and she could bring that form and say, these are the numbers they gave. I'm not saying that she will, but she has the option.
Yeah, that's the key thing.
These are the numbers that they gave me. Is this true? And if she's smart, she'll say, well, where is your literature? But I guess what it does is it puts the decision back in the hands of the consumer, but it also encourages her to make sure she's making a safe decision. And isn't that what the board is ready to do?
Right.
Right. And by creating a prescriptive consent that everybody, all the players are in agreement on, we can say then that each woman has been adequately informed as to the risks and benefits of vaginal birth after prior cesarean. So I'm going to kind of cut this.
Can I make one more cut? One more? Even language. Even language that the American College of OBGYN recommends against in this kind of consent.
Right.
I think might satisfy them.
Yeah.
So do we have people who are ready to write up such a document?
Let's see what Ms. Kirkmeyer has to say.
So Kimberly Kirkmeyer, Executive Director of the Medical Board. While I understand where you're trying to go with this discussion, I don't think the law will authorize us to do an informed consent to circumvent the law that was just put in. So I think we will need to take that back and discuss it as staff before any further discussions occur on that, because I don't think that was the intent of the legislature when they put that forward. And I don't think a informed consent that the woman is authorized, basically waiving her rights or waiving her ability to do that physician consult, or even understanding I know all the risks and benefits and I'm still agreeing to move forward with this. I don't think that was something that the law would authorize us to put into regulations.
But when we went through everything that was on the list, we took off some things. We agreed to take off certain conditions. So what we're talking about is an agreement to take off VBAC.
Absolutely.
How we're going to meet that agreement.
We know that you want to take off VBAC, but as Ms. Webb has stated, that has to go through a process of having a board approval. And at this time, we don't believe that that will make it through the board for approval to move the regulations forward if VBAC is not on there. So that's where we're struggling, and that's the whole crux of this whole issue.
So I want to be clear in my head here, and then I'm going to take a couple more questions, but then we need to move on. So what you're saying is you don't think the statute, the way that it's written, gives authority to the board to create a criteria for something that is neither on the list or off the list of referrals. For something that's kind of like a middle, because it would be kind of a middle ground.
Right.
So would that also include then in your thinking that we couldn't redo the language from the 2005 regulation regarding feedback? Is that
yes, that is exactly right, Carrie.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
I do believe that.
That's what I need to know.
And I know some of the discussions when it was going through was that this would eliminate that waiver of the 2005 guidelines that we had previously. So I know that was in some of the discussions that when the bill was going through. And, I think Ms. Webb has stated accurately, I think we've got to get some type of resolution in the middle. And one thing, just in Ms. Webb and I talking about what I'd like to do, and I'll just put it forward to the MAC, is I'd like to actually get a physician member from the board with a public member, or maybe even two physicians of a 2-member committee that could actually discuss this issue. So we have some board interaction on this issue, and have that, and maybe Ms. Sparvon, you could be the kind of the voice of the MAC on that, where you're talking to these 2 members and can discuss this amongst a partial subcommittee of the board. So I'll be talking to our new board president, Dr. Gonadev, about establishing a committee, because that way at least we have some interaction with the board, and hopefully we can see some resolution.
Yeah,
one side or the other. And
we know we have to have buy-in from the board. So
and I think we also need to wait for AB 1306 to see where it ends up through this legislative cycle as well.
Thank you. Tanya's ahead of you, Karen.
I want to address the VBAC issue just briefly as a point of fact. I just read the OBGYN Obstetrics Today article that came out, and the national average for VBAC in a hospital is 12.5%. 12.5% success rate. 12.5% success rate. And as you know, the review of maternal deaths in 2006, which spawned the CMQCC, California Maternal Quality Collaborative Care program, sponsored partially by the March of Dimes, in which since then I've been a member, and many doctors, hospitals, and institutions have participated. CMQCC originally, prior to that, when the state of California found that the cesarean rate doubled in the last few years, the maternal death rate tripled. Now, when the state health department reviewed, as is spoken in this document, all of the maternal deaths in California, and the doctors, the original response from ACOG was, well, it's women's fault that so many women are dying. They're older, they're fatter, they're more infertility cases, they're more diabetics, and so it's women's fault. When the state of California reviewed maternal deaths in California and teased out the women who were older, the women who were fatter, the women who had diabetes, and they discovered that the tripling of maternal death rates was because of cesarean section. And the cesarean section has risen every year despite people's willingness to try to find some way to curtail cesarean sections. And I think we have to present, in fact, midwives do one of the major things that prevents uterine rupture, which is one-to-one care, which doctors are not willing to do, which is why so many hospitals, as Jan said, 44%, don't do VBACs. And so it's important in terms of looking at long-term maternal outcomes. We really realize that midwives play a really vital role in lowering that cesarean rate. We need to be able to offer those women, and we need to get past this. I mean, you've got to look at what the real issues are. As the cesarean rate has risen, the death rates for mothers have tripled, and when they teased out all the reasons it could have been, it really stood with anesthesia and cesarean section, and we need to get really real about this and really serious. And I think that the MAC committee needs to really rev up those ovaries and get going to explain that we play a vital role in lowering those second and third cesarean sections. And as a matter of fact, one-to-one care lowers the primary cesarean rate, which is what we're going to have to do to lower, unfortunately, the overall maternal death rate in this state. And it's not just here, it's everywhere. But this is something that is very, very disturbing to me. And when we start talking about dissing around with language about cesarean sections and the right of a woman to have a VBAC, then we really are talking about damning her to two choices: repeat cesarean, knowing that the maternal death rate is going up, or, well, I'm going to do it myself, in which we also have higher death rates, and specifically baby death rates. And I reviewed 14 fetal death cases this year from home births from all over the country. And so I'm going to tell you that this is urgent that we do this. This is not something that needs to go on another 18 years. Anyway, that's just my 2 cents on it, and I think
Thank you, Tanya. I appreciate it.
Tanya, we've been talking about this for years, and that's why there is no movement on it, because we're holding the line against people having to go in for a consult that we think is
that we don't think we can get
unnecessary. So
well, we have to do that. We have to hold the line. I mean, it cannot, but we can't also at the same time let this continue to hold up legislation that forwards the goals of one-to-one care and decreasing maternal death rates.
Yeah. Well, it's a sad.
Okay. Sorry. Yeah, I'm gonna take Karen's comment and then your comment, and then we're gonna be finished.
Karen Ehrlich. It seems to me that we might be able to craft language to go in with this informed consent, saying something like, given the information in this informed consent, it is, although it is not possible to accurately predict who will or will not have these risks actually occur, the chance of those risks manifesting are incredibly small and can be considered to not affect the outcome of the pregnancy or the birth. In other words, to incorporate the language saying what the doctors are being asked to certify by doing this consult with women include that language in the statement in some way so that it satisfies the statute, but does not mean that the doctor is saying, I say that this woman will not have the outcome, the negative outcomes. Am I making myself clear? I would have to play with the language of this.
I think you're still talking about something that Kim has told us we can't do. It's a problem.
You mean we can't do a consent like
No,
this?
that's what she's saying. We don't have authority in the statute to do that.
I don't think this is circumventing anything. I think this is
okay. Wait, we can't do this anymore because time's going on and we're not getting anywhere. The opinion of staff is that we can't do a consent, and so we're gonna just hold on to that for now. And it may be that we have to go back to the legislature and do all kinds of other things. But at this moment,
then perhaps it would be a specific, generic statement that the OBs who are going to consult are asked to sign saying, given that there are risks and benefits, and that they are unpredictable. All I can say, basically, and again, I'd have to play with the language, all I can say is that it is unlikely that this pregnancy and birth will be negatively affected by a VBAC. And have some kind of generic statement that the docs would sign that would satisfy the statute.
I think you're going to get there with the docs. That's the problem. They want.
I wonder.
Okay. Karen, we need to. I'm sorry. We need to move forward.
I have a question about the procedures for it, and maybe this isn't a question for the full board, but how many members of the medical board have to pass it, and what are the options if they don't pass it legislatively?
A majority, and we go back and try to rework the regulation. Am I correct? Like if we put a
legislation, if you want to open that up.
Yeah, if we put a regulation in front of them that they turn down by a majority vote, then we either have to redo the regulation with their recommendations so that it can pass, or we have to go back to the legislature and get that piece of the law changed.
But politically, you've got to be smart. You know, if you're not going to get it passed by the board, you're not going to. I mean, to go all and do.
Yeah, there's no point.
The cart's getting ahead of the horse already. Here.
Yeah, I like Kim's idea of having a small little work group that maybe we can begin to inform each other
about. How often is collaboration happening between the MAC and the medical board on this?
It hasn't yet.
So Carrie has provided updates on this regulation at every board meeting for the last
to the board
several,
to the board meetings. But in terms of collaboration, they've heard my report and
and the other thing that could happen is you take it to the board and they change the language and they add VBAC in and then they pass it and then it goes through the regulatory process.
I forgot about that process. Thank you for so we could end up with something we really don't want by going that direction. So anyway, we all have to play nice together in the sandbox. I'm going to ask for. I guess I have to ask this. I don't really want to take any more comment on this, but is there any? Seeing none. Okay, good. We're going to have a 10-minute recess for the bathrooms. For that wonderful, lively discussion. Okay, we're gonna start back up here. We're gonna start again. Bathroom break is finished. So I think I'm on agenda item 8. Am I not?
Yes.
Okay. Yes, I am. All right. So this is an update on the interested parties meeting regarding the contents of the transfer of planned out-of-hospital delivery to hospital reporting form. Ms. Lowe.
Okay, I'm going to do this one.
Okay.
So we had an interested parties meeting on July 13th, 2016, and Shannon Smith Crowley, who was representing ACOG, agreed to try to find a legislative vehicle through a gut and amend process to have the requirements of the form more fully defined in statute, and also to have the form be sent to the Office of Statewide Health Planning and Development, also known as OSHPD, only and not come to the medical board. And this would allow for meaningful statistics to be gathered and compared with the LMAR. And there was a valiant effort that was not able to be put through for this legislative session through the gut and amend process. It is rather challenging, but the parties are going to continue to work together to try to find a legislative fix to this, hopefully for next session. For now, the current transfer form will be used, but this progress has been made on trying to resolve the issues that have been discussed.
Thank you. Is there any comment from the council? Yes.
I just want everybody to hear what I heard, because for me that was very eye-opening, that there does sound to be some movement going forward between staff and those people that are, quote-unquote, almost like preparing a barrier for things to happen. So I want to thank you for making that happen. I mean, I'll be cognizant of what we just heard.
It was a good idea that really didn't have enough time to really come to fruition. So we're going to all work on it, I think, between now and the next legislative session, and see if we can get there. Ms. Ehrlich, did you still have something you wanted to say?
Karen Ehrlich, this is semantics. It is a horrible title. Horrible. Transfer of planned out-of-hospital delivery to hospital reporting form. It's horrible. I just wish we could do something like out-of-hospital birth transfer report. Period. It's cumbersome.
I think as we go forward, we can change the name if we want to.
I'm putting in for somebody working on changing the title.
Thank you. Any other comments? No. Seeing none, we're going to move forward. This is an update on the midwife assistant regulations. Ms. Lowe, please.
Okay, so the most recent update on these regulations is that a public hearing was held on July 29th at the quarterly board meeting to approve the midwife assistant regulations. There were no public comments made during the open public comment period. However, during the hearing, an omission was identified by staff in section 1379.04 to reflect the 1998 version of CDC's guidelines for infection control in healthcare personnel. The board agreed with the recommended change and authorized staff to complete the rulemaking process. At this time, the final statement of reasons is being prepared, and upon completion, the packet will be forwarded to DCA for review and then on to the Office of Administrative Law to complete the process. At this time, we're anticipating that the regulations would be in place by spring or summer of 2017.
That long? Not January?
The regulations are only now approved on a quarterly basis instead of at the time of approval, so it could be spring, but there is a chance that it would not get moved out until the next quarter.
You're saying it couldn't be January?
There is a way to ask for an expedited enactment where once it's approved by the Secretary of State, it becomes effective. And so the staff will prepare a letter requesting that, and that way we can avoid the quarterly limitation on it. So I think we have good justification to make that request, and we'll do so.
That would be great. Thank you.
And that concludes my update.
Any other comments, questions? Nothing. All right. Agenda item 10 is an update on the licensed midwife annual report task force. Ms. Lowe?
As mentioned at previous MAC meetings, a survey was sent by board staff to licensed midwives in July to request feedback regarding the reporting format of the licensed midwife annual report. Unfortunately, it was brought to our attention that some midwives did not receive that.
I never got one.
Survey. That's who brought it to our attention. And that was due to the extract of data that we used to provide the mailer. So we've identified the midwives that did not have the original survey sent, and we'll be having that sent out next week. So there are some that did not get it originally. However, we have been receiving quite a nice response to the survey, and I imagine once we send out the rest of them that we will have a better understanding of where we'll need to go with the revisions to the LMAR. Now, the survey only was basically requesting feedback on the format of the LMAR, whether it be submitted electronically or paper, as well as if the report being submitted accumulatively as it's done now or prospectively. So once we receive the rest of those surveys, then we'll be reporting at the next MAC meeting to give you a better understanding of where we'll be going.
Super. Do you know how many people didn't get one or left out of the extractive data? Is that what you said?
Yes, extractive data. So there was approximately 118 that did not receive the survey.
I'm glad I wasn't alone. I thought maybe it was my mailman or something.
No.
Super. Any comments from the MAC? Questions from the audience? Seeing none, we're moving forward. All right, agenda item 11. All right.
Faith Gibson, California College of Midwives. It's not exactly a question, it's a statement, which is that I went over the statistics for both last year and this year and discovered that the numbers, that if you add together the numbers of vaginal births under P that went to the hospital and the number of C-sections done, it way exceeds by like 300 births the numbers of. You couldn't possibly have that many transfers and still, have any of the other numbers work. So I don't know what's going on, but it seems like, I don't know if it's a technical glitch or what it is, but we are getting, there's almost like 600 vaginal births claimed under the P section. You're familiar with P. The last two at the very end that give you information about outcomes after transfer.
Is that page 94?
Yeah.
So that's the next agenda item that we'll be getting to is discussing the actual.
She's not quite there yet.
LMAR results.
All right. Thank you.
Just to clarify, the survey that we're sending out and what we're looking for, it's not to clarify the different data elements at this time. It's to clarify how we will proceed with reporting. Once we determine that, then the next steps will be what revisions are needed to the LMAR. And one of those issues would be having data reported in multiple categories so that the numbers would match up and prevent that from happening.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Agenda item 11, program update. Ms. Lowe, please.
So on page 90 of your packets, we've provided the licensing statistics. And that is behind tab 11. As you can see, we provided the complete statistics for the 2015-2016 fiscal year. Of note, compared to last year, we've actually received 20 less applications than we have the previous year. With that said, though, the numbers of licensees and a current status remain consistent. So we have less new applications come in, but we're remaining that same amount of current population. I'm not going to go into too much more detail, or if there's any questions on licensing statistics, I could.
Well, my only question is, what's the difference between licenses canceled? Is that a combination of revoked, surrendered, deceased, or is it a different category? What does canceled mean, really?
In the top portion, that means that they've actually gone into a canceled status.
So they didn't renew it, but it wasn't revoked. Is that what you mean?
So when
not
a license
renewed but not revoked.
A license that is in a canceled status can either be done voluntarily to immediately put their license into canceled status, or once the license is delinquent for up to 5 years from the expiration date, then it would automatically go into a canceled status.
Thank you.
Okay, so all those delinquents are less than 5 years of not renewing.
Correct.
Okay.
Okay, so then I'm going to move on to to the next page, page 91 of your packets, which is the statistics for the transfer of planned out-of-hospital delivery to hospital reporting form. And I would also be in favor of changing that name. So as requested, we've separated these completely from licensing and enforcement statistics so they stand alone. We now have a full year of receiving the statistics since the law was required. So what you'll notice has changed this time is we've broken down the numbers by licensed midwife, reports received on certified nurse midwives, and those that have been submitted that we are unable to identify. So during the entire year since requiring it, we've received a total of 149 reports. Of those, 7 of those were identified as not being our licensee, and 2 we were unable to identify at all what licensee type they would have been.
So does that basically mean they're not in Breeze, or?
It's not. Those 2 that were submitted that we were unable to identify did not have a name provided, or there was no matching name in any of the systems that we have available.
So did I turn that off?
Yeah.
Did you try to compare the number of hospital reporting forms that were received, 149, compare them with the number of births that probably occurred in the hospital, given that our number 19 and 20 are number of planned at the outset of labor.
The hospital's
and
not doing their job.
Completed, there would be 500 and some actual
There would have been
transfers.
534 transfers based on what was submitted on the LMAR. 534 is the difference between planned out of hospital at the time of delivery versus those that were transferred. We received only 140 transfer forms for those licensed midwives. So that's a huge number of transfers that are occurring where the form is not being submitted. Now, some of those issues hopefully will be accounted for, and an improvement will be made once we have revisions to the form, as well as instructions and more outreach regarding the form. But yeah, that is a concerning number. Go ahead.
Whose responsibility is it to provide the form to the medical board?
The hospital is required to complete the form and provide it to us.
Has the Hospital Council of both Northern and Southern California been notified about this as far as doing outreach?
They have been involved in the process, not only from the get-go, but also with the revisions to the form. So they are aware of it and some of the issues that the board is facing in obtaining the forms.
So, and if they do not report, is that then reported to the entity that oversees their license or their ability to have patients present?
There's not a penalty built into the law, and I think once this is worked out, more education will be provided and outreach.
Yeah, I'm sure that will help. Thank you.
It would be really difficult to identify of those 350 or 400 transfers which hospitals they actually went to also. So we wouldn't know how to give them a demerit.
Point was made.
All right. Okay. So we are going to move on now to the enforcement statistics on page 92. We provided during the last quarter of the fiscal year, we received 2 new complaints. One was for a licensed midwife. One was for an unlicensed midwife or an unlicensed individual. There was also 1 referral to the AG's office for a licensed midwife. Those are really, the numbers are pretty minimal for the last quarter. So if you have any questions, otherwise I will move on.
I don't see any.
Go for it. So the next item is actually the licensed midwife annual report, which is agenda item 11C. We provided a copy of the summary of the LMAR, which starts on page 93 of the packets. Of note, at the top of the first page, it indicates that there were 394 midwives that were expected to report. Again, we've only received 343 reports during the year. That leaves 51 midwives that did not report by the cutoff time. We had the same discussion last year at this MAC meeting about the failure to report in a timely manner. We did additional outreach. We noticed it at almost every MAC meeting. We also sent letters in January and we sent letters out in January reminding everyone that their reports were coming up to be due. However, 13% still did not report. That's the same number as last year. So no improvement, but I guess there was no additional midwives or percentage that didn't report. The importance of reporting by the cutoff is that any data that is submitted after the cutoff is not counted in the report. So it's still submitted, but it's never going to be available for statistical purposes, which should be concerning. We've gone ahead and sent notice to the individual midwives who had not submitted, reminding them that they need to submit that report, and also reminding them that a hold's been placed on their license and they're no longer allowed to renew their licensed midwife license until it's completed. Not submitting in a timely manner not only delays the renewal for the midwife, but it also impacts staff having to reach out to get the additional information, and it's a requirement of law to submit it. So I will emphasize the need to submit it in a timely manner.
Make it harder for them to submit it before they can renew their license. That will help.
Make it harder for them to submit the Elmer?
When they submit it late and then they want to renew.
Well, most
suggest. It's also the idea, might I suggest, that whatever the date is that they have to renew by, they have to submit by, if it's July 1st, to move it up to like May 1st. To move the date physically.
Well, the cutoff is already March 30th to submit it, but they don't actually compile the data until, in this case, it was July 7th.
But you need to have it by what date?
We asked that it's submitted by March 30th.
So what if you were to move it to February 1st?
Couldn't get all the births,
It wouldn't allow the midwives a chance to have finished serving everybody that delivered by the end of December.
So by December 31st, how long are you still dealing with patients?
At least 6 weeks.
But I understand what you're saying, Barbara, except they're already giving them basically a 3-month window past the expiration date to still submit it and get it included in the LMAR summary. And 3 months is still not enough for them to get it after the expiration.
I just think maybe there's some way of asking midwives that fill out these forms what they might recommend to move up the time so that staff doesn't have to be so impacted. Because it's important for us to have the materials, the information.
Well, it's not the midwives who are filling out the forms.
They might have an idea of a better way of getting people to participate.
Yeah. Is there any way of telling, is it the same 50 people who aren't submitting their forms, or is it a different bunch of people every year?
No, we're not able to compare the two. However, we did another breakdown like we did last year, and it looks like this year there's actually more midwives that haven't submitted that are in California with their current license. Last year we had 14, this year we have 20. Mm-hmm. So last year we tried to figure out the rhyme or the reason why they weren't submitting. Maybe they're out of state, maybe they've been delinquent and they're no longer practicing, but really almost half of them are in California with the current license and they should be reporting.
But is there a way, I hate to harp on this because it is important. Is there a way of trying to do outreach to organizations that are in contact with these individuals? Somehow the story has to be told that we need this. It's seriously. It's the benefit for the statewide statistics that we get this information.
And we did ask last year, and I know Cam had mentioned that they would bring it up at their meetings and they would get it out to their members. So
I think I got more than one email from Cam saying, please send in your statistics.
So maybe it's time to start publishing names.
Yeah. The law doesn't permit that, so that would require a legislative change.
Well, let's go to the legislature for something else that's reasonable.
Okay, Ms. Ehrlich.
Karen Ehrlich, since it is already taking staff time once the midwives have not submitted by the end of March to try to get in touch with the midwives who haven't submitted to get them to do it, what about by the middle of, or even by the end of March, instead of waiting until July to say you didn't do this, why not at the end of March go ahead and write some kind of a note to the specific midwives who have not submitted and say you are delinquent?
We did do that.
So how about your license is subject
we sent the letter out in May, so it closed at the end of March March 30th.
Uh-huh.
Then we were provided the list probably mid-April.
Mid-April.
And we sent the letter out the beginning of May to those licensees, which still would have given them 2 months.
In order to get into the database. And did it increase the number who sent them in?
3 more had reported.
I guess
3 out of 50.
You need to come up and use the mic.
I was late in submitting last year, but one of the reasons is when I typed in all my stats, it wouldn't take it. There's something wrong with my license and my Social Security. However, that's done, but not by the medical board, by wherever it's going. There's something that bounces it right out. So mine would never submit. So I'd have to wait until I could get a copy and do it by hand again. And this is the second year in a row. So it's not that I'm computer illiterate or can't do it. It's that it won't take it. So that may be an issue with some of the...
But wait, when it doesn't take it? When it doesn't take it, how about picking up the phone? Maybe we need that.
I did do that.
Okay, you did. But
yeah, I did do that.
Is there something on the form that says if you have any problems, please call this number between these hours on these days?
On the online system through OSHPD, if for assistance, it refers them to OSHPD. But it is OSHPD that it is an error on the other end.
I was just hoping that there was a way to make your problem go
away. There was, and I did. And I did get mine submitted in by hand, but that was after trying and spending hours trying to get it to take it. So that may be one of the issues if somebody transfers even one number. Exactly. So that could be an issue.
Thank you.
Okay. So I'm going to move on to some of the actual statistics that are provided in the report. On the first page, Section D, it lists the total number of clients served as primary caregiver as 5,528, compared to 5,386 in 2014. So that shows us an increase of 142 clients that were served between last year and this year. So that number is going up slightly, but when you compare the LMAR numbers, for example, from 2010 to 2015, the numbers of clients served actually increased 2,413. So the numbers are definitely rising over the years. You may not notice it from year to year, but in the last 5 years, that's a huge increase. Yeah. On the second page of the report, you'll see the breakdown by county. There's 3,233 live births, 8 fetal demises, which decreased from 14 last year, 0 infant deaths, and 0 maternal deaths. You can also see at the bottom of the page this year that there were 172 successful VBACs, which increased from 150 the previous year.
At some point when you present the statistics, maybe at a year-end summary, or at some point maybe during fiscal or academic year, whatever you're working on, maybe it might be interesting to have some kind of statistics that go backwards for 5 years.
Side by side,
across, so I can, visually see it.
The other thing that would be helpful if it wasn't a huge chore would be if we had the columns in Section E added for us, like a total at the bottom or something, so that I could see the total number of cases of fetal demise without having to go through the column and add it up. Does that make sense?
Yep. All right, so pages 3 and 4 of the report, they list the different outcomes and reasons for transfer. I'm not going to go into detail on those. I did have on my report here to mention those out-of-hospital transfers, which is lines 20 that we already discussed. So just to emphasize, LMAR does report on the number of planned out-of-hospital births and then the total number of transfers. So going back to the transfer reporting form, this is one of the ways that we can use to compile that data that we're getting. That concludes my update on the LMAR. If there's any questions, I can try to answer them.
Who's up there?
I'd just like to point out just as a little detail in my sort of rather quick scan of this, that in Section I, line 60, still the largest number of women are transferred, not for emergencies, but for lack of progress. And I think that says we're doing a good job.
That concludes my update.
All right. Does anybody have comments on this from the MAC? Anybody from the audience? Jen?
Very quickly looking at this, but I noticed that under Section J, Item 70, there was only one suspected uterine rupture of the 172 successful VBACs. So I just wanted to point out that that's a very small number, and that's kind of like what we're talking about in terms of physician approval and all that jazz.
Unfortunately, we don't even know if that woman had a prior cesarean. And the other thing that we don't collect currently is how many VBACs were attempted. We only know the number of successful ones. And your point is still well taken. If we had one suspected uterine rupture that somebody was transferred for, we can assume probably that there were more than 170 attempted vaginal births at home after a prior cesarean. So I think still we could say that the statistics look really good.
So to Ms. Kirchmeyer's remarks before about putting a few people together to have a conversation, the way the statistics are laid out are very good for going down and seeing what information is there, but it's not very good for pointing out what we're looking to point out. So if there's
That'll
a way
be my job
of laying this out, those that have a brain to lay out stuff,
well,
figure this one out, and then I'm sure staff can, but there's some way of looking at this that we would easily see that without being.
Well, and that was the reason for the transfer, was suspected uterine rupture, but it doesn't even tell us if a uterine rupture occurred, because she could have suspected it, but then gone in and found that wasn't the case.
Right, but my point is 1 out of X number is the issue. And if it were 5 out of that number, that's the issue. It's just, it doesn't matter. So figure this one out.
Will do. Thank you. All right. I'm going to move forward. Agenda item 12 is agenda items for our next MAC meeting, which will be December 1st here in Sacramento. What is currently on the agenda will be my update, an update on the Licensed Midwives Annual Report Task Force, an update on any and all midwifery legislation, update on regulatory process pursuant to AB 1308. My script is wrong here. We're not having discussion and approval of MAC member position in December, are we? Okay.
Well,
because we won't. We need to.
Confirmation that the board approved Ms. Holzer.
Oh, well, yeah, okay. Can that be, maybe under program update or something, yeah? Okay. Okay, so that's what that is. All right. And update on the midwifery program. I would really be hopeful to hear from all parties, CAM, ACOG, et cetera, on forward movement on regulations surrounding this impasse over VBAC. That would be lovely to hear. And Ms. Webb, in terms of an agenda item, if we've got the update on AB 1308, then anything that would come out of my discussion with board members could be part of that. We don't need a separate agenda item.
I think that would encompass it.
Okay. You can finalize your agenda. Great. Anybody have anything to add to that? No? All righty then. Is it December that we choose new dates for the next year, or is? Mm-hmm. Okay, so that has to be on there too. 2017 dates. Okay. All right. If there's no more comment, we are adjourned. Thank you all very much. And please, all of the midwives who applied, please apply again.